The courtroom was silent enough to hear a tear drop. On one side, billionaire Alexander Sterling, radiating icy control, waited to discard his wife of 20 years. On the other, Elara Sterling, pale and composed, looked like a ghost in couture. The divorce was a foregone conclusion. The prenup was ironclad, leaving her with scraps. But the whispers in the gallery stopped dead when Elara's lawyer interrupted the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "My client wishes to introduce a document that invalidates these proceedings. A hidden marital agreement, signed by Mr. Sterling's own father." The air in courtroom 3B of the Manhattan Supreme Court was not merely tense, it was pressurized. It was the kind of wealth-heavy atmosphere that felt thick in the lungs, smelling faintly of old wood polish, expensive wool, and the metallic tang of unspoken cruelty. At the plaintiff's table sat Alexander Sterling. He was not a man who ever looked ruffled. At 52, he was leonine, with a full head of silver-streaked dark hair, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit from a Savile Row tailor whose name was only ever whispered. He was the CEO of Sterling Global, an empire of logistics technology and private equity built on the bones of his father's shipping conglomerate. He was by every metric a king. And today was a day of administration. He was tidying up a loose end. That loose end sat 30 feet away. Elara Sterling. 48, but today she looked 60. She was not a trophy wife in the traditional sense. She lacked the plastic sheen and predatory brightness. She was or had been beautiful in a quiet, academic way. Today she was just thin. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her simple navy blue dress was elegant, but screamed defense. And she had been the perfect partner, the perfect hostess, the perfect mother to their 2 children, Julian and Serafina. And now she was obsolete. "Your Honor," boomed Marcus Harding, Alexander's lead counsel. Harding was a shark in a $10,000 suit, a man who specialized in asset protection during marital transitions. "We are here to ratify the agreement signed by both parties on June 1st, 2004. It is clear, it is concise, and it is non-negotiable." The judge, a weary-looking woman named Judge Maria Esposito, peered over her glasses. "I have read the agreement, Mr. Harding. It is stringent." "It is fair, Your Honor," Harding countered smoothly. "My client, Mr. Sterling, entered this marriage with significant family assets. This agreement was designed to protect that legacy. Mrs. Sterling, who entered the marriage with, shall we say, modest means, is not left destitute." He proceeded to list the generous terms. 1. A lump sum payment of $5 million. 2. The deed to the Hamptons beach house. A property Elara knew was mortgaged to the hilt and cost a fortune to maintain. 3. A comprehensive, ironclad, and frankly terrifying non-disclosure agreement that would bar her from ever writing, speaking, or inspiring any work about her life as a Sterling. $5 million. To the gallery, it sounded like a lottery win. To the Sterlings, it was what Alexander spent on his yacht's fuel last year. It was less than a rounding error. It was an insult. Elara sat perfectly still. Her own lawyer, Rebecca Shaw, looked hopelessly outgunned. Shaw was young, earnest, and specialized in family law, not billionaire warfare. She looked like she was drowning. Alexander glanced at his watch. A subtle custom Patek Philippe. He had a board meeting at 3 p.m. He needed this finished. He permitted himself a brief, bored glance at Alara. He felt nothing. No remorse, no sadness. Just impatience. Their marriage had been a business merger that had run its course. He had new business to attend to. That new business was sitting in the third row of the public gallery, partially obscured by a dark hat and sunglasses. Catalina Moreau. 28 years old, the heiress to the Moreau industrial conglomerate in France. Catalina was not just his mistress. She was his future. Merging Sterling Global with Moreau Industries was Alexander's grand ambition, a legacy to dwarf his father's. Marrying Catalina was the key to unlocking the deal. The old guard at Moreau wouldn't do business with a man in the middle of a messy public divorce. They required stability. Alexander needed Alara gone, quietly and cheaply. Mrs. Sterling, Judge Esposito said, her voice softening slightly. You have read this agreement. You signed it. Do you contest its validity? Alara's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. The silence stretched. Alexander leaned forward, a predator, sensing the final moment. Mrs. Sterling, the judge prompted. Alara's lawyer, Rebecca Shaw, stood up. Her voice was a bare whisper. Your Honor, Mrs. Sterling does not contest that she signed the document labeled Exhibit A. Harding smiled. It was over. However, Shaw continued, her voice gaining a fractional amount of steel. We contest that Exhibit A is the governing document regarding the division of marital assets. Harding's smile froze. What objection? That is the prenuptial agreement. It is a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor, Shaw said. But we are here today to argue that it was superseded, that Mr. Sterling has willfully misrepresented the core architecture of the Sterling family assets to this court. And to prove it, I would like to call Mr. Alexander Sterling to the stand. A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. You didn't just call Alexander Sterling to the stand. He was the one who observed, who judged, who decided. Marcus Harding was on his feet instantly. Objection, Your Honor. This is a circus act. The validity of a signed contract does not require oral testimony from my client. This is a blatant attempt to harass Mr. Sterling and drag this proceeding into a media spectacle. Judge Esposito looked at Rebecca Shaw. Ms. Shaw, you are walking a very thin line. The document is clear. What possible relevance could Mr. Sterling's testimony have? It is relevant, Your Honor. Shaw said, her hands visibly trembling as she consulted her notes. Because the prenup, Exhibit A, concerns the division of assets acquired during the marriage. We contend that Mr. Sterling has actively hidden the true nature of the most significant asset, his controlling interest in Sterling Global. Alexander, who had been watching this with mild amusement, suddenly went very still. His eyes narrowed. He looked at Harding, who gave a slight reassuring shake of his head. It was impossible. The shares were his, inherited from his father. They were non-marital property. The shares were inherited, Harding snapped. They are categorically separate property, not subject to division. Ms. Shaw knows this. This is settled law. The shares, yes, Shaw agreed, turning to face Harding. But the health of those shares, the value that was maintained and grown through the direct and indirect efforts of my client. But more importantly, we contend those shares are subject to an entirely different agreement. An agreement Mr. Sterling is very much aware of. She's lying, Alexander whispered to Harding, his voice a low growl. Your Honor, I must insist, Harding pressed. This is baseless. The court is curious, Judge Esposito said, her eyes fixed on Shaw. I will allow the testimony. But be warned, Ms. Shaw. If this is a fishing expedition, I will bury you in sanctions. Mr. Sterling, please take the stand. Alexander Sterling, for the first time in his adult life, was compelled to do something. The air crackled as he stood. He walked to the stand with deliberate, unhurried steps. He was sworn in his hand on the Bible, looking like a mockery. He settled into the chair, adjusting his suit jacket, and fixed Rebecca Shaw with a look of such concentrated power and disdain that a lesser lawyer would have simply dissolved. Shaw took a deep breath. Mr. Sterling, you are the CEO of Sterling Global. Is that correct? It is. And you inherited your controlling interest from your father, the late Arthur Sterling. I did. You've often said in interviews that you modernized the company, that you brought it into the 21st century. I did. My father was a brilliant man, but he was analog. I built the digital and logistical empires. I quadrupled the company's value. He said this not as a boast, but as a simple statement of fact. Do you recall Project Aegis? Shaw asked, her voice quiet. Alexander's eyes flickered. That was 15 years ago. A strategic acquisition. A strategic acquisition of a tech portfolio that was by all accounts failing, Shaw pressed. Is it not true, Mr. Sterling, that Project Aegis was hemorrhaging money, that your father, Arthur, was vehemently against the acquisition? My father and I had different strategies. I was proven correct. Were you? Shaw took a step closer. Or is it true that your father personally intervened using his own private capital not associated with Sterling Global to bail out the project and prevent you from bankrupting the primary trust? Harding shot up. Objection. This is ancient history. It has no bearing on this divorce. It has every bearing. Shaw's voice rose, surprising everyone. It establishes a pattern of Mr. Alexander Sterling's recklessness and his father's attempts to mitigate that recklessness. A pattern that shows Arthur Sterling's profound distrust of his son's judgment. This is slander. Alexander snapped, his composure finally cracking. The king was angry. Is it, Shaw replied, or is it fact? Isn't it true, Mr. Sterling, that after the Project Aegis debacle, your father restructured the entire Sterling Family Heritage Trust? Alexander's face was pale with fury. My father's trust is private family business. It's this family's business, Mr. Sterling, and it's at the heart of this divorce. Shaw turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling has based his entire argument on the fact that his shares are separate property. We are here to prove that those shares are not entirely his to control, and that his wife, my client, was the only person his father trusted to protect them. In the back row, Catalina Moreau slowly, unconsciously took off her sunglasses. This was not going to plan, Miss Shaw, you are making extraordinary claims, Judge Esposito warned, her voice sharp. If you are implying there is another document, you had better produce it. In due time, Your Honor, Rebecca Shaw said, her confidence growing as Alexander's composure slipped. But first I must establish motive, not my client's motive, but the motive of the man who built the empire, Arthur Sterling. She turned back to Alexander, who was gripping the railing of the witness box. Mr. Sterling, you and your father had a contentious relationship, did you not? I loved my father, Alexander said stiffly. We all love our parents, Mr. Sterling. But did you respect his wishes? Or did you find him old-fashioned? A relic. Harding was apoplectic. Objection, psychology, relevance. Overruled, the judge snapped. I want to hear this. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. Alexander's jaw tightened. My father and I had a robust exchange of ideas. He respected my vision. Did he? Shaw countered. Or did he respect your wife? Isn't it true that for the last 10 years of his life, your father Arthur worked almost exclusively with Elara on the family's philanthropic endeavors, and more crucially, on the long-term strategy for the Heritage Trust? The courtroom was absorbing this. Elara Sterling, the quiet, mousy wife, the one being discarded. Alexander had painted her as a socialite, a hanger-on. But Shaw was painting a different picture, the trusted confidant of the patriarch. My wife handled charities. Alexander dismissed with a wave of his hand. Flowers and hospitals. It kept her busy. She managed a foundation with a $2 billion endowment, Shaw fired back. She managed it so well that it grew by 30% during a recession, while your Project Aegis required a $1 billion bailout from your father. Is that flowers and hospitals, Mr. Sterling? Alexander was silent. He had no answer. He had never paid attention to what Elara did. It was just Elara's little fund. He had fatally underestimated her. He had fatally underestimated his father. Shaw's voice softened, becoming narrative. Let's paint a picture for the court. A flashback, if you will. The night of November 10th, 2018. Your father was very ill. You were in Shanghai trying to close a deal he had explicitly forbidden you from pursuing. But Elara was at the Sterling estate, Willow Creek. She was with Arthur. They were in his study. Objection, hearsay. How could she possibly know this? Harding yelled. Because my client was there, Mr. Harding, Shaw said simply. And because Arthur Sterling kept a journal my client has provided. Alexander looked as if he had been struck. What? Shaw continued, her voice painting the scene. Arthur Sterling was in his wheelchair, a blanket over his knees. He looked at Elara and he said, the study at Willow Creek. Rain lashes against the windows. Arthur Sterling, frail, but with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, sips a small glass of whiskey. Elara is sitting opposite him, reviewing a ledger. Arthur, voice weak but firm. He's going to ruin it, Elara. He's in Shanghai chasing that fool's errand with the Moreau Group. He's dazzled by them. He sees the glitter, but he doesn't see the rot underneath. Elara. Alexander is ambitious, Arthur. He wants to make his own mark. Arthur, a harsh cough. His mark. He's a gambler, Elara. You know it, I know it. He sees my life's work as a stack of chips. But you see the foundation. You see the legacy. He wants to merge with Moreau. I've seen their books. They're leveraged to the sky. They'll hollow out Sterling Global, sell it for parts, and leave him holding a bag of debt. Elara. He won't listen to me, Arthur. You know that. Arthur leaning forward. He doesn't have to listen to you. He just has to obey the rules. The rules I set. He thinks the prenup he made you sign is the only one that matters. He's forgotten about my rules. Elara. Arthur. What did you do? Arthur smiling a thin, cold smile. I did what I always do, my dear. I created a fail-safe, a contingency. He can have his affairs. He can be a fool. But he cannot destroy this company. He cannot destroy this family. And he cannot discard the only person who actually understands its value. He cannot discard you. The courtroom was tomb-like. Alexander Sterling was white. He was no longer a king. He was a son who had been outmaneuvered by his own father. That's a lie, Alexander shouted, pointing at Elara. She's fabricating this my father's journals. She stole them. He bequeathed them to her Mr. Sterling, Shaw said calmly, along with a key to a safe deposit box. A box you were not aware of. Ms. Shaw, Judge Esposito said, her voice barely a whisper. What is in that box? Marcus Harding looked like he was going to be physically ill. He was realizing in real time that he had been brought to a gunfight armed with a strongly worded letter. He had based his entire case on a document that was about to be rendered worthless. "Your Honor," Rebecca Shaw said, walking back to her table. She picked up a single sealed document encased in a protective plastic sleeve. Mr. Harding was correct. Exhibit A, the prenup is ironclad. It governs personal property, real estate, and alimony, and my client is prepared to honor it. Alexander looked confused. Harding was stunned. Honor it. That meant $5 million. She was accepting the insult. My client will gladly accept the $5 million and the Hamptons house, Shaw announced. A confused murmur filled the gallery. Catalina Moreau smiled for the first time. The fool was folding. However, Shaw said, her voice ringing with sudden triumphant power, that agreement has no jurisdiction over the Sterling Family Heritage Trust, because that is governed by this. Again, she held up the document. The defense presents Exhibit B, a binding addendum to the Sterling Family Heritage Trust executed on June 2, 2004, one day after Alexander Sterling had Alara sign his prenup. We call it the Patriarch's Clause. This is theater and ambush, Marcus Harding was shouting, but the judge silenced him with a look. Mr. Harding, you are the one who insisted on ratifying this agreement today. You pushed for this hearing, Judge Esposito said. Ms. Shaw is presenting evidence directly related to the assets you claim are not marital. I want to see this document. Now. A court officer took the sealed document and handed it to the judge. The silence in the room was absolute. Judge Esposito broke the seal, unfolded the heavy, cream-colored paper, and began to read. Her eyebrows disappeared into her hairline. She read it once. Then she read it again, her lips moving slightly. Alexander Sterling watched her, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a bluff. It had to be. A desperate last-minute gambit by a woman with nothing left to lose. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Esposito looked up. She looked at Alara, then at Alexander. Her expression was unreadable. Mr. Harding, Mr. Sterling, approach the bench. Alexander and his lawyer walked forward, their steps leaden. Rebecca Shaw joined them. The judge turned the document so they could read it. Alexander's eyes scanned the dense legal text. Addendum to the Sterling Family Heritage. Trust. Re-spousal protection and legacy preservation. This addendum is to be enacted upon the event of a petition for marital dissolution filed by Alexander M. Sterling against Alara K. Sterling. Alexander's blood ran cold. In the event that said petition is filed for any reason other than documented felony conviction or court-proven marital infidelity on the part of Alara K. Sterling, he had filed for irreconcilable differences. A no-fault divorce. The cleanest, quickest way. He had been having an affair with Catalina for a year, but he was the one filing. The full block of voting shares in Sterling Global, 61%, currently held by Alexander M. Sterling, having been bequeathed by Arthur L. Sterling, shall be deemed at risk. Deemed at risk. What did that mean? He read the next line. And the world fell away. Therefore, 51% of said voting shares, a controlling interest, shall be immediately and irrevocably transferred from Alexander M. Sterling and placed into a new independent trust to be administered for the benefit of the Sterling family bloodline. The sole trustee of this new trust, with exclusive and total voting power, shall be. Alexander's finger traced the name. He couldn't breathe. Elara K. Sterling. He staggered back, grabbing the bench for support. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. It was a corporate poison pill. It was a checkmate from the grave. Arthur Sterling had not disinherited his son. He had done something far more cunning. He had allowed Alexander to keep his wealth, his money, his golden goose. But he had given the control, the power to run the company, to vote on mergers, to hire and fire the board to Elara. He could be a billionaire, but she would be his boss. "This is fake," Alexander roared, his voice cracking. "She forged it. This is a joke." "It is no joke, Mr. Sterling," Judge Esposito said, her voice like ice. "It appears to be a perfectly executed and binding trust addendum." "Who signed it?" Harding demanded, snatching the paper. "Who signed this monstrosity?" His eyes went to the signature page. "It's signed by Arthur Sterling," Harding said, his voice weak. "Of course it is, but it's not countersigned by Alexander. He never agreed to this. It's not valid." Rebecca Shaw spoke, her voice clear and precise. "It's an addendum to a trust he created, Mr. Harding. He, as the grantor, had every right to add any stipulations he wished. Mr. Alexander Sterling was the beneficiary, not a partner in its creation. He doesn't have to sign it." "But it needs an executor." Harding was grasping at straws. "Who notarized this? Who was the executor that kept this hidden for all these years? No one. It's fake." Alexander was laughing now, a broken, high-pitched sound. "He's right. She faked it. My father's executor would have told me. My father's lawyer would have known. And my father's lawyer is my lawyer." He turned a triumphant, desperate sneer on his face, looking into the gallery to the man who sat in the second row, the man who had been the Sterling family's consigliere for 40 years, the man who had sat with Harding to prepare this very case. "Tell them, Jonathan," Alexander commanded. "Tell them this is a lie. Tell them my father would never do this." All eyes turned to the man. Mr. Jonathan Croft. An older gentleman, impeccably dressed with the quiet dignity of old money and old secrets. He had been Arthur's most trusted friend. He had been Alexander's mentor. Jonathan Croft stood up slowly. He looked at Alexander with an expression of profound, weary sadness. He adjusted his tie. He then turned to Judge Esposito. "Your Honor," Jonathan Croft said, his voice resonating with ancient authority. "I cannot tell him that." Alexander's face crumpled. "Jonathan, what? Please look at the signature page again, Mr. Harding." Rebecca Shaw said, her voice gentle. "Look at the witness signature. Look at the notary stamp." Harding's hands were shaking. He looked down. Signed Arthur L. Sterling, witnessed and notarized Jonathan D. Croft, executor, Sterling Family Trust. "It was signed by his own," Elara whispered, finishing the thought from the prompt. "It was signed by his own father, and it was hidden by his own counsel. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that Alexander Sterling simply sank into his chair, a king with no kingdom. The courtroom exploded. The gavel banged, but it was useless. "Recess, recess, clear the court!" Judge Esposito yelled. Alexander was frozen, staring at Jonathan Croft. The press was swarming photographers, climbing over benches, screaming questions. "Mr. Sterling, is it true? Have you lost your company? Mrs. Sterling, are you the new CEO? Mr. Croft, why the betrayal?" Elara was ushered out by her lawyer through a side door. Alexander's security team formed a tight wall and forcibly moved him into a private conference room with Harding and a shell-shocked Jonathan Croft in tow. The door slammed shut, and Alexander launched himself at the older man, shoving him against the wall. The Patek Philippe on his wrist dug into Croft's shoulder. "You!" Alexander roared, his face purple. "You did this! You were my father's man! You were my man! You sat in my office! You helped me plan this divorce! You traitor!" Jonathan Croft, despite the violence, remained calm. He did not flinch. He simply met Alexander's gaze. "Release me, Alexander, or I will have you charged with assault, and I assure you my word carries more weight in this building than yours does today." Alexander let go, backing away, breathing like a winded bull. Harding had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "It's over. It's all over." "Why, Jonathan?" Alexander's voice was now a broken plea. "All these years, you were family. Why?" "I was Arthur's family," Croft corrected him, straightening his jacket. "And Arthur, God rest his soul, was a genius. But he was not blind. He loved you, Alexander, but he did not, and I quote him, trust you with a hot dog stand, let alone a global enterprise." He said that often, Croft replied dryly. He saw this day coming. He saw her coming. He gestured to the door where Catalina Moreau was now being blocked by security. "Arthur knew you had a weakness for shiny things. He knew you saw the company as a reflection of your own ego. He knew you would one day try to merge with Moreau, a move he called setting fire to the lifeboats." "The Moreau merger is brilliant," Alexander protested. "The Moreau merger is a vanity project that will bankrupt you," Croft said. "They are a house of cards, Alexander. Arthur knew it. And Ilara? Ilara was the only one who bothered to do the research and prove it. He made this addendum for one reason, to protect the legacy from you. So you just sat there? For years you watched me." "I was bound by my oath as executor," Croft said. "The document was to remain sealed and hidden unless two conditions were met, Arthur's death and your filing for divorce. When your lawyer filed the petition last month, the mechanism was triggered. I was legally bound to release the addendum to Ilara's counsel. My only regret," Croft added a flicker of distaste on his face, "is that I had to sit in meetings with Mr. Harding and listen to him call Mrs. Sterling a gold digger when I knew she was about to become his boss." The realization hit Harding first. "Wait. The addendum gives her the shares. It doesn't stop the divorce." Alexander looked up, a new desperate hope in his eyes. "He's right. The divorce, it's still valid. The prenup, Exhibit A, Shaw said Ilara would accept it." "Yes," Croft said. "She gets the $5 million. So," Alexander said, a manic grin spreading. "So she's the new trustee. Fine. I'll still be divorced. I'll be free of her. I'll still have my billions in personal assets. I'll start over. I'll build a new company. A bigger one." Croft sighed and looked at Alexander with pure pity. "You still don't get it, do you? You haven't understood the checkmate." Harding, who was now reading a copy of the addendum with growing horror, spoke. "Oh my God. Alexander. Section 4, subsection B." "What?" Alexander barked. Harding read aloud. "Should Ilara K. Sterling, as sole trustee, deem that Alexander M. Sterling is acting in a manner detrimental to the long-term financial health of Sterling Global or its brand, she is granted full proxy authority over all his personal assets, including properties and liquid capital, to prevent further damage to the family legacy." Alexander Sterling simply fell apart. He wasn't just losing his company. He was being put on an allowance. "He's neutered me," Alexander whispered. "My own father. He castrated me. And he used her to do it." He used the wife you underestimated, Croft said. He used the woman you thought was only good for flowers and hospitals. He used the partner he trusted. The door opened. A court officer stuck his head in. Judge Esposito is back on the bench. She wants a final disposition. Now. When they re-entered the courtroom, the very air had changed. The aggressive blood sport tension from before the recess was gone. In its place was a heavy, brittle silence, the kind of quiet that follows an earthquake when everyone is too stunned to speak, afraid the slightest sound might bring the rest of the building down. The press was standing, cameras and phones held aloft, but no one was shouting. The gallery was motionless. All eyes were on the two tables, but the polarity of the room had been irrevocably reversed. Alexander Sterling, who had walked in as a king surveying his domain, now looked like a defendant awaiting a death sentence. He was pale, his silver-streaked hair slightly mussed for the first time in his life. He sat, but he looked smaller. Elara Sterling, who had entered as a ghost, now sat with an iron stillness. She was no longer a victim. She was the epicenter, the quiet, unmoving center of the storm he had unleashed. In the second row, Jonathan Croft, the architect of this betrayal, stared at the floor, his face a mask of grim duty. Judge Maria Esposito re-entered and sat her face like carved stone. She looked at the packed room, then at the lawyers. "We have had," she began, her voice a low, controlled force that cut through the silence, "a significant and, I must say, unprecedented development. The court has taken the recess to review Exhibit B, the Patriarch's Clause, in chambers. I have confirmed its authenticity, its signatories, and its binding legal standing with the executor of the Sterling Trust, Mr. Jonathan Croft." At the mention of his name, Alexander's head involuntarily snapped toward Croft, a look of such profound, venomous hatred in his eyes that several people in the gallery audibly gasped. Croft did not look up. "The document is valid," Judge Esposito declared, her words landing like hammer blows. "It is ironclad, and its stipulations are as of this moment in effect contingent only on the outcome of this hearing." She turned her gaze to Alexander. "Mr. Sterling, you filed a petition for divorce. Your counsel, Mr. Harding, has argued forcefully for the immediate ratification of Exhibit A, your prenuptial agreement." She then swiveled her chair slightly to face the defense. "Ms. Shaw, your client, Mrs. Sterling, is now in possession of, shall we say, significant leverage. The court asks for your position. Do you wish to contest Exhibit A in light of Exhibit B?" This was it, the moment of execution. Rebecca Shaw stood. The trembling, outgunned lawyer from an hour ago was gone. She now stood with the serene, unshakable confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "Your Honor," Shaw said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room, "my client wishes to be accommodating. She has no desire to drag this out. Therefore, she is fully prepared to accept the terms of Exhibit A as presented by Mr. Harding." A confused murmur rippled through the courtroom. Alexander and Harding exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. What? This was the trap. It had to be. To accept $5 million when she was being handed a multi-billion-dollar company, it made no sense. In the back row, Catalina Moreau, who had returned during the recess, leaned forward, a flicker of confused hope in her eyes. Was the fool actually folding? "My client," Shaw continued, "will graciously accept the $5 million severance payment. She will accept the deed to the Hamptons property. She will, of course, be waiving all rights to alimony, as she will now be in a financially secure position. A few stifled laughs were quickly shushed. However, Shaw said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine, our acceptance of Exhibit A is naturally predicated on the simultaneous and immediate execution of Exhibit B. The two are, in our view, now linked. Harding shot to his feet. Objection, that's what Mr. Harding. Judge Esposito cut him off. Logical. Your client came here to sever this marriage and divide the assets. We are now simply clarifying all the assets and all the agreements. Sit down. Harding sat, his face slick with sweat. Shaw continued, turning her body slightly to address Alexander directly. To be perfectly clear what this means, Your Honor, upon your ratification of this divorce, my client Elara Sterling assumes her role as sole trustee of the Sterling Heritage Trust. This gives her 51% controlling voting power in Sterling Global, effective immediately. She looked down at her notes as if she were simply reading a grocery list. Her first act as trustee will be to call an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Her first agenda item will be the immediate and permanent cancellation of the pending and deeply flawed merger with Moreau Industries. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. Catalina let out a small, strangled sound. This wasn't just a divorce. Elara was vaporizing his entire future, his legacy, his mistress in one sentence. Her second agenda item, Shaw added, her voice chillingly casual, will be to commission a full independent forensic audit of the CEO's executive expenses personal accounts and all Project Aegis-related funds going back the last 10 years. That was the kill shot. He was not just losing his company, he was being investigated. By her. She wasn't just taking the crown, she was putting him in the stocks. Judge Esposito looked at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Harding, Mr. Sterling, how do you respond? The court is waiting. Do you wish to proceed with the divorce? This was the trap. Arthur Sterling, his own father, had laid the perfect diabolical trap from the grave. Alexander's mind, which he'd always prided himself on being a steel weapon, was now a smoking ruin. He ran the scenarios in a fraction of a second. Option A. Proceed with the divorce. He gets what he thought he wanted, his freedom. He gets to discard Elara. He is divorced. But in that exact same instant, Exhibit B activates. Elara takes his company. She takes his power. She cancels his deals. She audits his life, and she will find the slush funds, the hidden accounts, the money he'd funneled to Catalina. He would be a billionaire on paper, but he would be a pauper in power. He would be a castrated king, a laughingstock forced to beg his ex-wife for his allowance. Catalina Moreau wouldn't stay with a man who reported to his ex-wife. She'd be gone in a day. He would be left with nothing but money humiliation and the title of the man who lost it all to the wife he ignored. He would be obsolete. Option B, stop the divorce. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. The clause, the patriarch's clause, he tried to remember the exact wording. To be enacted upon the event of a petition for marital dissolution. It was a dead man's switch. It only activated if he finalized the divorce. If he stayed married, Exhibit B went dormant. It went back in the vault. The nuke stayed in its silo. If he stayed married, he kept his company. He kept his CEO title. He kept his power. He kept his facade. But he would be chained forever to the woman he had just tried to publicly humiliate and discard. He would have to go home to her knowing she held the axe over his head. He would have to sit at board meetings, knowing she had this document, this corporate nuke, ready to be used the second he stepped out of line. He could never ever try to leave her again. He could never ever be with Catalina. He looked at Alara. She was watching him. Her face was calm, her eyes unreadable. She knew. She had known this would be the outcome. She and his father had known his ego. They knew he would never choose public castration option A. He would always choose the gilded cage option B. She hadn't come to court to get rich. She hadn't come to fight for scraps. She had come to win. Not the divorce, the war. His choice was simple: be a powerless, humiliated divorce or be a powerful, captive husband. It was no choice at all. Alexander Sterling, a man who had never bent a man who had built an empire on his own unshakable will, finally broke. He couldn't speak. The words were choking him thick with his own bile and pride. He leaned over to Marcus Harding, his entire body trembling with a rage so profound it was indistinguishable from terror. He whispered, his voice a raw, ragged croak. One word. Withdraw. Harding, who looked as if he had aged 20 years, blinked. His eyes widened first in confusion, then in profound, abject relief. He had been saved from the most spectacular professional immolation in legal history. He straightened his tie, stood up, and attempted to gather the shattered remnants of his dignity. "Your Honor," Harding announced, his voice booming with a grotesque false confidence, "after further consideration and a heartfelt and profound discussion with my client." He gestured to Alexander, who looked like a man being strapped into an electric chair. "It seems," Harding continued, "there has been a significant misunderstanding. My client, Mr. Sterling, has in the course of these proceedings been reminded of the deep and abiding love he has for his wife." A wave of derisive, shocked laughter rippled through the press, which Judge Esposito silenced with a single furious look. "My client," Harding forged on, "has realized this petition was filed in haste, perhaps in a moment of professional stress. He is deeply remorseful for the pain this misunderstanding has caused. The plaintiff wishes to withdraw his petition for divorce. He wishes to reconcile." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the room held their breath. This was a surrender more total and more humiliating than any financial judgment could ever be. Judge Esposito looked not at Harding, but at Alara. She was the only one with any power left in the room. "Ms. Shaw, your client's response to this reconciliation." The judge's slight emphasis on the word was an indictment in itself. Rebecca Shaw leaned over and whispered to Alara. Alara nodded. Once. Shaw stood. "My client is moved, Your Honor," she said, her voice a perfect neutral blade. "She, too, is eager to return home and begin the healing process. She accepts her husband's apology." "Very well." Judge Esposito raised her gavel. Alexander watched it rise, a black moon blotting out the sun. She slammed it down. The sound echoed like a gunshot or a prison door clanging shut. "Petition withdrawn. This case is dismissed." The slam of Judge Esposito's gavel was not just a sound. It was a physical blow. It was the crack of a rifle, the shriek of a collapsing girder, The final definitive thud of a vault door being sealed, with Alexander Sterling locked inside. "Petition withdrawn. This case is dismissed." The words hung in the super-chilled air, crystalline and deadly. Alexander did not move. He couldn't. His body, so accustomed to command, had mutinied. His lungs refused to draw a full breath. The starched collar of his $2,000 bespoke shirt, which hours ago had felt like a mark of superiority, now felt like a garrote slowly tightening. He was staring at the polished mahogany of the plaintiff's table, but he wasn't seeing the wood grain. He was seeing the rest of his life. It was a long, dark, airless tunnel, and at the end of it, holding the only key, was Alara. The courtroom, which had erupted in chaos moments before, was now held in a new kind of grip. The tension had not dissipated. It had transformed. It was no longer the electric crackle of a coming storm. It was the heavy pressurized silence after the lightning strike, when the smell of ozone fills the air and the true scope of the damage is revealed. The press, the gallery, the court officers. They were all statues, their collective gaze fixed on the woman at the defense table. The gravity of the room had shifted. Alexander Sterling had for his entire adult life been the sun. He was the center. Everything and everyone orbited him. Now, in the space of 30 seconds, he had become a dead moon, and a new icy planet had pulled the entire system into its orbit. He watched as if in a nightmare as Alara began to move. There was no haste. There was no giddy, victorious rush. That would have been human. This was something else. This was corporate. She methodically placed a single legal pad into her briefcase. She took her sterling silver pen, a gift Alexander suddenly sickeningly remembered from Arthur 20 years ago, and clicked it shut with a small, definitive snick. Her hands were perfectly steady. She was not a wife who had just survived a legal battle. She was a CEO who had just concluded a hostile takeover. Rebecca Shaw, her lawyer, was the one who looked human. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears of relief and sheer, unadulterated triumph. Alara placed a hand on Shaw's forearm, a brief, firm squeeze. It was not a gesture of thanks. It was a gesture of dismissal. Your part is done. Shaw, understanding, took the document that had destroyed a dynasty, the Patriarch's Clause, and placed it not in Alara's simple briefcase, but in her own locked, hardened legal case. The scepter was being returned to its vault to be kept safe, to be held in reserve. Then Alara stood. The rustle of her navy blue dress was the only sound. She adjusted her jacket, pulling it straight, and she began to walk. She did not walk toward the exit. She did not look at the press. She did not even glance at the gallery where the seat once occupied by his future Catalina Moreau remained glaringly, accusingly empty. She walked toward him. It was the longest walk of Alexander Sterling's life. It was a funeral procession, and he was the corpse. Every click of her sensible, low-heeled shoes on the courtroom's marble floor was a nail in his coffin. Click. The sound of his merger with Moreau vanishing. Clack. The sound of his authority over the board gone. Click. The sound of his affair, and any future affairs, rendered impossible. Clack. The sound of his father's laughter, a cold, dry cackle from the grave. He watched her approach. The woman he had ignored for a decade. The woman he had deemed adequate, plain, uninspired. The woman he had called a ghost in his own home. He saw with a clarity that burned his retinas how wrong he had been. He had mistaken stillness for weakness. He had mistaken silence for submission. She wasn't a ghost. She was a hunter. She had been sitting in the blind, perfectly motionless for 10 years, waiting for him to make the one fatal move that would bring him into her sights. And today he had. She arrived. She stopped directly in front of the plaintiff's table. She stood over him. He was the king on his throne, but she was the one holding the axe. He was forced physically to crane his neck to look up at her. The new power dynamic made literal. The cameras behind her exploded, a silent, blinding strobe of flashes turning the moment into a series of stark, terrible photographs. The defeated husband, the victorious wife. He could almost see the tabloid headlines, "Sterling stunned wife takes all." But she didn't care about the cameras. She looked only at him. He had expected to see hatred. He could have fought hatred. He had expected to see smug, tearful triumph. He could have borne that. He saw neither. He saw in her clear, calm, gray-blue eyes something far more terrifying appraisal. She was looking at him not as a husband or even an enemy. She was looking at him as one would an asset on a balance sheet. A volatile, problematic asset that had just been brought under new management. She was assessing his utility. She leaned down. Her proximity was suffocating. He could smell her perfume, a faint, clean scent like lilies and paper. It was a scent he had never once bothered to notice. Now it smelled like embalming fluid. She spoke her voice so low, so devoid of emotion, that it was infinitely more terrifying than any shout. It was a whisper meant for him and him alone. The final terms of his surrender. "I'll be taking my father's old office, Alexander," she murmured. He flinched. Not just an office. His office. The one on the 80th floor, the one that had been Arthur's. The one Alexander had coveted his entire life and had never been given. His father had left it empty, a symbolic rebuke. Now he knew why. "The corner one," she continued, her voice as smooth as glass. "With the view of the park. His view." She let that sink in. "I will have Mr. Croft send a team for your things. Have your personal effects, the photos, the polo trophies, whatever it is you keep in there, cleared out by 9 a.m. tomorrow." It wasn't a request. It was an order. His first order. She started to straighten up as if the transaction was complete. But then she paused as if remembering a minor housekeeping detail. "Oh, and Alexander." He looked up a trapped animal. "Cancel your dinner plans." His blood went to ice. She knew. Of course she knew. She knew about Catalina. She knew everything. She had just with 4 words cut the last escape route, the last vestige of his other life. "Tell the chef, Julia, isn't it?" She continued the question, purely rhetorical. "Tell Julia I'll be home at 8. We need to discuss the children's new trust allocations." She leaned in a fraction closer, the final devastating blow. "Your father felt, and I agree, that their access needs to be significantly restructured, protected from market volatility." He was the market volatility. He was the risk. He was the bad investment. She had just declared him a danger to his own children's inheritance. He had no words. He couldn't speak. He just stared, his world reduced to the pale, composed face of the woman who had just clinically, systematically, and completely dismantled him. She held his gaze for 1, 2, 3 more seconds, letting the totality of his defeat settle into his bones. Then she straightened up, her duty done. She turned her back on him. The turn was the final brutal act of dismissal. It said, "You are no longer my concern. You are no longer my equal. You are simply furniture in my new house." She walked. The click-clack of her heels resumed, this time moving away. Steady, measured, relentless. The sound of the new monarch leaving the execution block. She passed the bar. She reached the towering courtroom doors. She pushed one open, the heavy oak swinging silently on its hinges. Elara Sterling stepped out into the hallway and was gone. For 1 second, the courtroom remained frozen in its shocked tableau. Then the dam broke. It was a sonic explosion. The press gallery surged forward, a chaotic wave of bodies and cameras held back by scrambling court officers. Shouts echoed off the high ceiling. "Mr. Sterling! Mr. Sterling! Is it true? Have you lost your company? Alexander, did your father betray you? Are you broke, Mr. Sterling? What did she say to you, Alex? What did she say?" Marcus Harding, the shark, the titan of litigation, simply deflated. He slumped into his chair, his $10,000 suit crumpling. His briefcase, knocked by his own knee, tipped over, spilling the now useless papers of Exhibit A onto the floor. He ran a shaking hand over his face, his voice a hoarse croak. "I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know." Alexander Sterling heard none of it. He was alone, trapped in a hurricane of his own making, blinded by the strobing flashes of the cameras. He saw his reflection distorted in the polished table. He saw a man his father had despised, a man his wife had just conquered, a man who still possessed, on paper, billions of dollars, but who had in that moment nothing. He had his name, but it was no longer his. He had his company, but it was no longer his. He had his marriage, and it was now and forever his cage. The king was dead. Long live the queen. And just like that, the game was over. In the halls of power, it's not always the loudest voice that wins. Sometimes it's the one who plays the long game. Alexander Sterling thought he was divorcing a wife. He discovered he was challenging a queen. His father, Arthur Sterling, didn't just build a company. He built a fortress, and he gave the keys to the only person he trusted. Elara didn't just stop a divorce. She took an empire. What do you think of Arthur's ultimate plan? Was it brilliant or a cold-blooded betrayal of his own son? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories where the underestimated come out on top and justice is served like this video, and share it with someone who needs a reminder to never, ever be underestimated. And make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single story of high-stakes drama and epic revenge.